Yesterday we got started on the ceiling that goes around the wrapping porch. So it's going to go all the way around the house, around the perimeter of the house on about 3 sides. And what we're doing here is we're putting a ledger on the wall and then just filling it in with studs, and then putting another ledger on the outside where the fascia would go. So we're pretty much using the same methods and techniques that we use for other things. We're using our laser level to make sure that along the wall our ledger is the same height as out there at the fascia. So we're leveling that as we go. I tried to pre-build it as a wall and then just slide it up and over the headers that we built, but it won't clear the distance from the wall. And there it actually hits one of the purlins in the roof. It hits that as it goes up. So instead of being able to kind of pre-frame them and slide them up and just tack them to the wall, I'm having to put the ledger on, put the board on the fascia, and then set all the studs in, which is no big deal. I started yesterday and I went pretty slow because I was toenailing the boards in, toenailing the studs into the ledger. But I was getting caught up on my Essential Craftsman videos last night, and I saw him doing some sealing. And looks like today I'm going to be putting in pressure blocks, I think is what he called them. And that's basically a block that goes on the ledger that allows you to nail the stud into that instead of having to try to angle and toenail into the ledger here. So I think that's going to speed things up today. I'm excited. I always love getting great tips from the internet. I spend a lot of time on YouTube, and I come up, a lot of people have some really great ideas, some really great techniques for doing things. I think that's going to speed things up today. So let's get to put in some ledgers. I've got one more out here on the fascia. I've got one more stud to put up. I didn't know if I should put them up, both ends. I didn't know if I should put them up first or if I should put one on and then slide the other one in. It actually is pretty hard to slide them in. I cut my studs, I almost always cut them really precise, and so it's been difficult to slide that in. So I'm going to slide that one in and get caught up, but I think going forward I'm going to put both of the two end, the ledger and then the one out on the fascia. I'm going to put both of those in, and then I could I could fold in all my studs. So we're trying to knock that one out first and then get back on to put in ledgers and put in studs in. So I had a bit of a hard time trying to get this so that as I tried to slide this in between the studs, I had a hard time keeping it where it didn't just fall out. So the way that I did it, I just took a piece of a Simpson strap that I had, tacked it to the stud. The stud's not technically where it needs to go. I still have to make all the spacings, but you can kind of see how it goes in. This stud will sit in along that, right inside the back side of what will ultimately be our fascia. So that's the stud out at the front face of the fascia, and this hopefully will help sturdy that up a bit. So it will. Right now it's just a stud, and some of these studs are almost a 14-foot span. So out in the middle it's a little bit bendy, if you will. So we're going to be able to tie this into our studs that are going all the way back and tied into our wall. So that out there in the middle of the span should really help stiffen our fascia up. The other thing that it helps with is you can almost see it. In this case you can't really tell because that one's sitting a little bit high, but the stud does bow a little bit as it gets out into the middle, and so we'll be able to go along this edge with our laser level, and we'll be able to level this off, and as we level it off we'll be able to tack it to that stud on the bottom. And as we do that, that'll make sure that our bottom edge of our fascia is perfectly level. So this is going to be unique to this system, so anybody else that has to kind of frame around this is how I wound up trying to do it. It has you can see there's a little bit of a difference between where the bottom of the purlin is and where our fascia metal is going to wind up. The fascia metal that I'm talking about is basically that piece of metal there that needs to go up over and cover our soffit. So has to have something down there at the bottom of those
So this is basically what I'm doing to make it so that I can do a straight soffit all the way down. So our soffit will, and our fascia trim will go right out there, screw to this front face, and I'll put a piece of J along that piece right there. And after we wrap this, we'll wrap this, and then we'll put the J on this, and our soffit will go from the fascia back to this header. So it's cloudy today, which is great because it's not that hot, but unfortunately it's kind of a light rainy day. So I was gonna do the board out there on that fascia, but it looks like I'm gonna have to retreat back in where it's dry, and I'll just start working on the boards against the wall here. And when it stops raining, I'll have to come out and finish up the ledger out by the fascia. So that's what I was referring to before, the pressure block. And it's basically a block screwed or nailed to the ledger. Then it allows you to face nail or screw this stud into it. It worked out really well. It actually went a lot faster than it had before, and it was easier to keep it on the line. One of the downsides is you pull your tape from the back side of that stud, every 2 feet, and that means I added an extra step where I measure over from that line the 1.5 inches, so I know where to put the block. Because I wanted the blocks on the back side, I'm right-handed, and it's easier for me to nail this face of the stud than the other face of the stud. So I just added that in just for my own convenience. But another thing I learned, you'll see this block, and I tried to pound these in closer. They put about a 1/4 inch gap, and that was from the stud being crooked. And so it leaned, right? You can imagine it leaned against one of the edges, and it added a 1/4 inch gap. So I think going forward on this outside header, I'll go ahead and pull back from the last one that I've done. I'll mark out all my 2-foot spans. At least I have a ballpark, so I put the stud up there. I know it's coming out perpendicular from the wall, but that sped things up quite a bit. So I think I'll stick with that.
So I like to hand pick my lumber, and even with hand picking lumber, this is still kind of some of the wood you wind up with. I knew I was going to cut quite a bit off of these, so it wasn't a really big deal. But this is a good example of kind of what you get. That's obviously not very square, and it's a pretty rounded board. And so for what we're doing, in this case, I cut this off. It was scrap. I'll just use it for blocking or something like that. But that obviously wouldn't work very well if you were trying to screw drywall to it. Starts to make a pretty small angle. So that's one of the pieces I came across. This is another really good one. So hopefully you can see that's a pretty significant knot all the way through the board. I don't think you'd want to rely on this board to be doing too much, but again, in our case, in my case at least, I knew I was going to cut these down. When I bought the wood, I needed 10 footers and they didn't have any, so I ended up buying 12 footers. And so I knew that at least for whatever board I was going to cut, 3 feet of it was basically going to come off, because I really only need one just under 9 feet long. So, but this is kind of our lumber selection.